I will letting people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Microsoft Fabric. My name is Bianca, and I'm a marketing consultant at Pinwire Technologies. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Today's topic is preparing for Microsoft Fabric, everything you need to know. In the next 45 minutes, we'll walk you through the key capabilities of Microsoft Fabric and how Fabric can enhance your current investments on Azure Data and Analytics services. Before we begin, let me highlight a few housekeeping items. During the webinar, please feel free to post questions and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. For those questions not answered, we will do our best to answer post-webinar. This session is being recorded and will be shared with you in the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm delighted to introduce you to our session speakers, Praveen and Chandra. Praveen is a data and AI SME at the Microsoft Global Black Belt Americas organization with core expertise in cloud scale analytics and Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform. He has 18 years of sales consulting and a hands-on analytics experience in data and AI across US, Canada, UK, and India. He has led successful engagements with enterprise customers to design multi-cloud implementation architectures and solutions across the globe. Chandra is a VP of Data and Analytics at Pinwire. He is an accomplished and passionate CXO facing data analytics, AI, ML, and generative AI executive with over 20 years of global leadership experience. He brings deep expertise in Microsoft technologies and data visualization, AI, ML, and OpenAI LLMs. Welcome, Praveen and Chandra.
Thank you so much, Bianca.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'll be talking about Microsoft Fabric, an all-in-one analytic solution for enterprises that covers everything from data integration to data science, data warehousing, real-time analytics, and business intelligence. Let's start with looking at today's data and analytics challenges organizations face today. All the enterprise organizations, they wish to find a unified source of truth by breaking the data silos across their organization. There is always a need for balancing data access and self-serve analytics without compromising the governance layers. Data demand is rising exponentially, and we still find that there is limited scalability if we use legacy data solutions. And all our customers demand on ways to deliver the power of analytics with limited resources. These challenges, they require thoughtful planning and strategic decision making to ensure that our business users can use data effectively to stay ahead of the competition. Investing in these technologies to make real-time data-driven decisions without compromising our security and governance posture is critical for organizations' long-term success. Moving on, let us talk about what have we been hearing from our customers. We have spoken to a wide range of customers who have led their organization in data-first modernization. These are some of their priorities. First, there is an increasing need to unify all the disparate data sources and, more importantly, keeping the cost in mind. Second, the data platform, it has to be governed and secured to minimize the security breaches and data risks. Third, data being the new currency, it is very important to improve the analytical agility to enable business in making the right decisions at the right time. Finally, business users, they should be able to effectively use the technical insights your data platform provides to make data-driven decisions. Next, we'll talk about how do you really modernize your data and analytics platform and why is it critical for your business transformation needs. To overcome the challenges what we spoke about, it is very important to modernize your data and analytics platform. By using comprehensive data and analytics technology, customers can overcome these challenges and they can gain a competitive advantage. Currently, if you look at, organizations rely on a variety of siloed solutions and data. There is an increasing need of an integrated SaaS-based suite. All our end users should be able to access the same unified data in an integrated suite of data platform. Today, managing data, it comes with serious security risks. An integrated data and analytics suite with built-in industry-leading security, compliance, and governance gives your teams peace of mind. More than ever before, there is an overwhelming demand for data stewards at every organization. An easy-to-use data and analytics platform, it'll empower your business users in various non-technical roles to leverage the data platform and the analytics solutions for increased business agility. It is no secret that our legacy systems come with costly integration and ongoing maintenance. Therefore, it is imperative that businesses have access to a cost-transparent suite with reduced management overhead. Next, I would like to introduce Microsoft Fabric and how can it accelerate the data potential in your organization for the era of AI. So what exactly is Fabric? Fabric is a complete analytics platform and it brings together experiences such as data engineering, data factory, data science, data warehouse, real-time analytics, and Power BI in terms of business intelligence onto a shared SaaS foundation. It allows your creators to concentrate on producing their best work, freeing them from the need of integrating, managing, or understanding the underlying infrastructure that would support such a kind of experience. Fabric comes with a SaaS multi-cloud data lake, which is called OneLake, and it stores data in the open Delta Lake format. All the Fabric workloads are automatically wired into OneLake. Just like you would have seen all the Microsoft 365 applications, they are wired into OneDrive. Data will be organized in an intuitive data hub and automatically indexed for your discovery, sharing, governance, and compliance. This allows you to retain the data where it is, while using your preferred analytic solutions and tools and technologies to preserve your single source of data truth. Fabric is business-centric. It is integrated with Microsoft 365, which will give your business users the amazing power of technology to make data-driven decisions. Power BI, as you all know, as a BI tool, it's a core part of Fabric, and it is already infused across Microsoft 365. Through Power BI's deep integrations with popular applications such as Excel, Microsoft Teams, PowerPoint, SharePoint, and your relevant data applications, the data in OneLake would be easily discoverable and accessible to users right from Microsoft 365, which would help our customers drive more value from the data. Let's talk about the AI powered. How does it? How does Microsoft Fabric enable the AI in your data and analytics suite of solutions? Fabric, it's already infused with Azure OpenAI service at every layer to help the customers unlock the full potential of the data, which will enable your developers to leverage the power of Gen AI against their data and assisting business users to find insights in the data. With Copilot already integrated in Microsoft Fabric, users can now use conversational language to create their data flows, their data pipelines, generate code, and entire functions. They can also build machine learning models or visualize results directly in Power BI. Customers can even create their own conversational language experiences, which would combine Azure OpenAI service models and their data and publish them in Fabric as plugins. Let's look at the next important part of Microsoft Fabric, the data foundation, OneLake. So what exactly is OneLake? OneLake is a unified location which is built on ADLS Gen 2, what you also know as Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, to store all your organizational data where the Fabric experiences operate. It provides a single SaaS experience and a tenant-wide store for data, which will serve both your professional and citizen developers. OneLake is automatically provisioned with every Microsoft Fabric tenant, and it is designed to be a single place for all your data. So all in all, basically what you get is one data lake for the entire organization, one copy of data for use with multiple analytical engines, and you can explore all this data using a OneLake file explorer, just like you do it for Windows. Also, OneLake is open at every level, so it supports the same ADLS Gen 2 APIs and SDKs, which are compatible with existing ADLS Gen 2 applications, including Azure Databricks. Finally, security in OneLake is derived from Azure AD authentication, and it is completely compatible with your user identities, service principals, and managed identities. I would like to touch base next on shortcuts. How does Microsoft Fabric enable a multi-cloud interface? So what exactly is a shortcut? It is essentially a reference or a pointer to the data which is stored in other file locations so that you don't have to migrate or move any of your existing data, whether it is on a different cloud or even Microsoft ADLS Gen 2. The shortcut capability also extends to allow you to compose and analyze data across multi-cloud environments with transparent, intelligent caching, which will reduce your egress cost and it will also bring your data closer to the compute. So you'll be able to effectively share data between users and applications without really moving or duplicating your existing data stores. Finally, why do we really need shortcuts? Shortcuts in OneLake, they would allow you to unify all your data across domains, clouds, and accounts by creating a single virtualized data lake for your enterprise. So you can use your shortcuts to eliminate the edge copies of data what you would have created earlier and reduce the process latency associated with your data copies and staging. Shortcuts, they appear as simple folders in OneLake, and they can be used transparently by any experience or service that has access to OneLake. Uh, I would like to talk about one copy of data for all your compute engine experiences, what Fabric provides. So OneLake, like I described, it aims to give you the most value possible out of a single copy of data without your real data movement or duplication. Uh, you really don't need to copy any data just to use with, let's say, another compute engine, or you'll be able to easily break down your data silos so that you can analyze all your data from other sources. It'll eliminate today's pervasive and chaotic data silos, which individual developers create when they provision and configure their own isolated storage accounts. Uh, it's basically a single unified storage system for all your developers, wherein you'll be able to discover and share the data and all in compliance with your policy and security settings, which will be enforced centrally and uniformly. Let me give you an example. Let's say if you have a team of SQL engineers who are building a fully transactional data warehouse, they can use the T-SQL engine and all the power of T-SQL to create their tables, transform and load the data to tables. Now, let's say your data science team wants to make use of the same data. They no longer now need to go through a special Spark or a SQL driver. Since all the data is stored in one lake in a Delta Parquet format, your data scientists would be able to use the full power of Spark engine and its open source libraries directly over the data which is stored in one lake. Moreover, business users can also build their Power BI reports directly on top of the data which is sitting in one lake using the new direct lake mode in the analysis services engine. Now, let's talk about the kind of experiences what Fabric provides in the realm of end-to-end analytics. There are 7 key experiences for end-to-end analytics which Fabric delivers. They are data integration for your ELT, ETL needs using Data Factory and Power Query data flows. Second would be data engineering for your lakehouse architectures using Spark. Then the third is data warehousing for your enterprise data warehousing needs using T-SQL. Fourth would be data science for your AI/ML needs using Azure Machine Learning. Next one is real-time analytics for all your telemetry or observational data stores using Azure Data Explorer. Finally, business intelligence using Power BI for all your reporting needs. And we have also built trigger actions using a no-code experience. Whenever the engine detects a pattern or a condition, it is known as data activator. All in all, Fabric powers all your user personas in the organization, such as data engineers, data scientists, business analysts, and business users, with a SaaS platform which is completely governed and future built for developers' collaboration. I would next like to talk about a high-level pricing on how Fabric is priced and it can be used by your organizations. With Microsoft Fabric, customers generally see two types of charges on their bill. They are the amount of compute they provision and the amount of storage they use. We have simplified the pricing a lot here. Starting with compute, your bill would be dependent on the size of capacity you choose. It is per second billing with 1 minute minimum at a pay-as-you-go rate, or you can also save money with Fabric capacity reservation by committing to a reservation for a duration of 1 year. Fabric capacities, they provide all the compute resources for all the experiences we just talked about in Fabric, from the data factory to ingest and transform, to data engineering, data science, data warehousing, real-time analytics, and all the way to Power BI for data visualization. A single capacity will power all the workloads concurrently and does not need to be pre-allocated across your workloads. Moreover, a single capacity can be shared across multiple users and projects without any limitations on the number of workspaces or creators that can utilize it. Next would be the OneLake storage. Since OneLake serves as a central repository for all your organization data, it is built at a pay-as-you-go rate in terms of dollars per gigabyte per month. Cross-region data transfer network charges may apply. It will be based on the source and destination of each storage access. I think I will hand it over to Chandra next to talk about Microsoft Fabric adoption.
Thank you so much, Praveen. So as you heard from Praveen, with Fabric, we're talking about a SaaS-based service that unifies various capabilities that we're all used to as data platform SMEs or people who've been working in the data construct, data and analytics construct. What I'll try to do is try to take that next step of moving from a good understanding of what Fabric offers to a point where we're trying to adopt Fabric, scenarios where we're adopting Fabric. And when you think about adopting Fabric, there are a number of things that you would obviously want to consider. As a customer, you already may be using Azure Data Services. For example, you've invested in Azure Data Factory or Synapse pipelines. You've invested in Synapse. You're using dedicated SQL pools. You're using your Spark pools. You've invested in Power BI for your visualization and BI-based capabilities. You may or may not have investments in Azure Cognitive Services or Azure Machine Learning, as well as Azure OpenAI. So one of the scenarios that I would try to tackle, and some components of it in this webinar, is let's say you are a customer who's already invested in Azure Data Services over the past year, 2 years, 3 years, and have migrated some of your legacy ecosystem to Azure, and you have an Azure-centric data architecture. How do you adopt Fabric? What changes do you have to consider? What are the benefits that you will get from Fabric versus your current PaaS-based ecosystem? And what is the journey to migration? That's one part. The second part is a little more simpler. For example, if you are following or using a legacy data capability at this point in time that does not follow an Azure-centric architecture or a more modern data-centric architecture, then the migration or the modernization into Fabric. What does it take to go through that process? So I'll talk a little bit about the process and the approach for both these scenarios. My initial focus would be for customers who have some Azure footprint. So keep that at the back of your mind as I speak through this. So what are the top questions that are coming in your mind if you are an Azure customer? The first one typically is, well, I have spent the time, energy, and effort in building out a data platform using Azure Synapse, Azure Data Factory, or Synapse pipelines. I have the Azure Data Lake storage in my service in my ecosystem. What would Fabric provide me that is differentiated from what I already have? Is it a cost-based proposition? Is it a unification proposition? Do I have to spend the time and energy to migrate what I've already built? What challenges am I going to encounter as I go through this transition or migration from my current ecosystem to the Fabric ecosystem? Where do I start my journey? Honestly, right? And the second thing is, and I mean, as I talk about all of these questions, the second thing is, where do I start my journey, and should I embed Fabric as a path in my data modernization journey, or should I think of Fabric as a completely new setup for me? So a lot of these questions are usually part of what customers are thinking about, especially when you've invested in Azure for the last 2 or 3 years, and what changes in that overall architecture span. So a couple of things, right? I mean, more often than not, or more likely than not, the Azure Medallion Architecture has been laid out as part of your modernization effort. If you already invested in Azure, you've invested more likely than not in some of these core services. And the architecture that you see here should be very relevant for you. You might already have this setup, right? The Medallion architecture, just very commonly called out um, following what Databricks started using that terminology, and I think it's used across the industry now. It's very popular. It follows the structure of a data lake storage from a sourcing standpoint, getting the data into a raw area, a staging area, and a curated area, or a bronze, silver, and gold, with the raw data sitting in the bronze part of the data lake, certain data quality checks and transformations in the silver zone. And your gold zone is more aggregated data, and that could typically be used for data warehousing based needs. In some cases, it stays in the data lake as well. So also the construct of the data lake house enables you to be able to run your queries against your gold layer, potentially against your silver layer as well, depending on what kind of audience you have. But getting back to the architectural construct, if you've been on Azure, more likely than not, you've built this data lake architecture, data lakehouse architecture, and then you might potentially have a Synapse dedicated SQL pool for data warehousing, a massive parallel processing scale capability for your analytics. You also would more likely than not have Power BI, either a pro or a premium based license for consuming that data and other integrations or other patterns of consumption, either from the dedicated SQL pool or from the data lake storage, the gold layer of the data lake storage. So the most common question that comes up is, so I have invested in this. I have all of these services that are sitting or that are tied to each other. How do I consider moving to a one lake based architecture that Praveen just talked about, right, from Microsoft Fabric standpoint? So one option, obviously, to do that is to create shortcuts. And I think Praveen talked about a lot about the shortcuts and what kind of benefits they offer. But one way is to use your current data estate or the data lake estate that you already have, and then create a one lake unified environment with shortcuts potentially to your gold layer, potentially including your Synapse data warehouse as a shortcut into your one lake ecosystem. And then you have Power BI under the Fabric ecosystem for your reporting and visualization needs, or you can use the data science workbench that is offered through Microsoft Fabric for your machine learning based capabilities that you can enable. The benefit of using this approach, and this is just one of those approaches that you could use, where you're continuing to use your past service for your data lake, and then you're bringing shortcuts into your one lake, and any new data sets, external data sets that you want to ingest, you could potentially ingest into your one lake construct within Fabric. It kind of gradually moves you to start using your Fabric ecosystem as your core data platform, but it's not. It can happen sooner. You don't have to wait for the copy of your data from your data lake, your Azure Data Lake storage into the One Lake construct, because that's the other option as you start copying or migrating your data assets that you have in your Medallion architecture into your One Lake construct, because your One Lake, as you heard, is also based on ADLS Gen 2. The core data setup is still ADLS Gen 2 at the core of it. So that foundation can benefit by using shortcuts from the existing data assets, external data assets, kind of unifying the data estate, and then slowly you could potentially consider migrating some of these into your One Lake construct. So, and it can happen seamlessly. So the data sourcing piece and the data storage piece is one part to keep in mind. What are the positives or benefits? Obviously, you're trying to combine your data lake and your data warehouse workloads into a single unified capability. You don't have to necessarily consider a separate serverless or a dedicated SQL pool for your data warehousing. Core layer kind of functions as both, whether it's within One Lake or it's outside of One Lake. The uh, the the One Lake construct from a compute standpoint and the engine that it uses also uses MPP Polaris, which eventually or which is kind of the same basic foundation that was used for the serverless SQL pool, which is the ability to have high performance data warehouse based capabilities enabled for you. So that's another positive that you would have if you invested in Fabric and you were migrating from your current Azure Medallion architecture. And seamless data exchange, as we talked about shortcuts, you could quickly move into Fabric, start using all of the benefits of Fabric without having to wait to move all the data into that ecosystem. Some things to ponder. As I said, if you have a dedicated SQL pool, the question is, do you want to continue to use that dedicated SQL pool? What's the cost aspect of it? How is it being utilized? You could still start with a shortcut and eventually look at considering the core layer within your One Lake to become because it's highly performant, as you probably have heard from Praveen and from others as well. So the data lake construct itself is highly performant. So the need for a dedicated SQL pool is something that you would want to consider. The second thing is if you are already using Spark in your Azure data service, either Databricks Spark or Apache Spark, and you have fairly high performance computing, the question is, do I want to bring that, or do you start using Spark within Fabric, or can I continue to use it outside? So the questions start coming in whether I should consider Fabric. Is it mandatory for me? Is it not mandatory for me? And technically, it's not mandatory. You could continue to use your past services. The benefits should typically outweigh the risks that you're considering and the questions that you have. And the third thing is obviously about workload capacity. If you are absolutely unable to predict the capacity, because Fabric is the cost of using Fabric is based on capacity and units that you would consume. If that is unpredictable and you continue to need a serverless PaaS-based service and individual services that you want to turn on and turn off based on your ecosystem, then you would want to consider or kind of think about whether Fabric is the right solution for you or not. So we talked about one part, which is the storage component, an important part of your Medallion architecture, right, in terms of how data is stored and how it is used. We'll talk about the second capability, which is, let's say you are a Power BI Premium customer, right? You're using Power BI Premium for your visualization and reporting needs. You could quickly turn on Fabric in your admin portal and start leveraging the Power BI license for a very low cost entry into Fabric. Can I get into Fabric? Yes, absolutely. Can I use Power BI's premium capacity to get into Fabric? Absolutely. Just one thing to keep in mind is the only P SKUs and FS SKUs that are greater than F32, which means F64 and above, will allow the same capability from a Power BI standpoint in terms of distribution, publishing content, accessing shared content, and so on and so forth. If you are on a lower FSKU, then you would need pro licenses to consume Power BI content. So that's something to keep in mind as you're starting to look at your Power BI Premium licenses. However, if you don't have Power BI Premium license, you could obviously start enabling Fabric. It's a fresh start. You're trying to build it for a particular business function. You want to get that up and running, go for it. I mean, you don't have to wait for or start looking at your Power BI Premium licensing and go to that. You can do that with or without that. One key input, right? Why Power BI in the PaaS-based world versus Power BI in the Fabric-based world what's that key difference? And I'm sure most of you heard about direct lake connection, the nature of how data sets were being created in Power BI, the querying capability in the past versus how it is now, the way data is stored now in one lake, the Delta Parquet format that Praveen talked about, and obviously it's being used more and more in the one lake construct. It just eliminates the need for you to create multiple copies of that data. In the earlier instance, we typically either used direct query, which would take a significantly longer period of time because of performance constraints running that data against the data lake, or you would have a cache built in within your Power BI data set for it to be used as a consuming entity. But then the refresh process wouldn't happen as quickly as possible, so you probably won't have access to more real-time data. With Direct Lake and the querying capabilities that come with it, now with Parbi and the connector back to the Delta Parquet format, there is no translation from the Delta Parquet format back to a format that Parbi would support. That whole process is seamless now, which means your performance is as good as direct query with Direct Lake. And at the same time, you can eliminate the need for creating an additional layer of storage within your Power BI cache layer of storage. So something to keep in mind as you migrate or consider Fabric, very, very critical capability from a Power BI visualization standpoint. Broadly, from a licensing standpoint, nothing would change if you're just continuing to use Power BI. You've been using Power BI against your Synapse workloads. You've been using Power BI against your data lake workloads. Those will continue to survive and continue as they've been continuing. So the second key thing, as I said, was the Power BI piece. We talked about the storage. We're talking about the consumption, which is what changes from a Power BI standpoint. So the positives obviously are direct link. That's the biggest positive to keep in mind as we go through this life cycle. Power Query to load data with data flow Gen 2, similar to loading to Power BI dataset. That's a capability that Fabric offers. Web-based, the semantic models and a report creation without a desktop-based utility is another one. Because if it's within the umbrella of Fabric, you're doing it within the same interface that you have within Fabric. As we heard, it's an end-to-end SaaSified platform, which means you don't need to have separate desktops for Power BI. It's within the Fabric interface itself. So that's a significant advantage. What would you think about, I mean, in case you already are a Power BI customer, if your use case is purely reporting, in the sense your data stores, you're not planning to migrate your data stores, you're going to keep that as it is. Potentially you have a SQL Server environment or you have an Oracle environment and using Power BI against that, something to keep in mind. If your cost or your utilization is not about data and visualization and you're continuing to use it for operational reporting or for analytical reporting against an existing data estate, then you could continue to use that. Then the question is, should I consider Fabric? Should I not consider Fabric would come into picture. If your data architecture, for example, does not consider a lakehouse-based setup, and if you have a more conventional data warehouse setup, and you have Power BI running against that, that process will continue to remain the same. In the sense, if you're running, as I said, against a SQL-based database as your source data for your Power BI, it won't change anything. Unless you move into that lakehouse-based architecture that Fabric supports, you will not have any specific benefits. So something to keep in mind if you're considering moving away from Power BI separately into Power BI within Fabric. The third component, which is obviously the ingestion part, right? When we talk about the whole life cycle of data to insights, we're talking about storage, we're talking about ingestion of data with Data Factory or with other tools that you have, or you're talking about reporting and visualization, you're talking about the data science workbench and the like. So we talked about the storage and what changes and what is to be considered when you have a Medallion architecture or you don't. The second thing is more around consumption that we talked about with Power BI. The third key aspect is around Azure Data Factory. And if you're using ingestion and you're continuing to use Data Factory in your current state, right? When you're moving data and you're plumbing data across your data architecture. So in a typical Azure-based modern data architecture, you would be using Data Factory both for your orchestration as well as for your ingestion-based capabilities. What changes here? It's a little simpler. There's a Fabric Data Factory capability that is enabled within the SaaS platform. A slight variation to what you have, and there is more and more documentation that's starting to come out to distinguish what ADF does versus what data factory within Fabric would do. If you had to migrate, I think Microsoft's bringing up capabilities to kind of accelerate or mount the existing pipelines from ADF into and Synapse that you already have, your Synapse pipelines into Fabric. That's still work in progress as you understand, and you'll probably hear more about that. And then running your pipelines with data flows, which is more around orchestration in a SaaS-based model, in that SaaSified architecture versus a PaaS-based model that we've been using. But so this is primarily to give you some comparisons between Azure Data Factory that you're using or Synapse pipelines that you're using versus Data Factory in Fabric. There are some nuances in terms of how where there's more efforts, especially when you're migrating your Data Factory pipelines within your conventional data services architecture in Azure, the PaaS-based architecture, versus in Factory. So two things to keep in mind are if you're using Azure SSIS integration runtimes, and that's typically if you have SSIS-based downstream storage that you're using or SQL Server-based downstream storage that you're using, then you would have used SSIS integration runtimes. And that you would have done that typically if you're migrated from an on-prem SQL Server instance to a cloud instance, and you're continuing to use those pipelines using your runtimes, SSIS integration runtimes. That is still not available, and that may or may not be available. So it's not a recommended path in that case, and we'll have to see how that evolves. And the second thing is obviously your MVNet and private endpoints, how those would work out in the new construct is something to keep in mind. But the enablement of data flows with Gen 2 in the Fabric environment, as we've called out, is fairly simple, straightforward, minimal effort. But the migrations have to be taken into consideration. So I mean, I'll also talk about the adoption path because you have to consider adoption in the adoption lifecycle. You'll have to consider the integration components, the ingestion components, the engineering components, the data storage components, the visualization components, and then the AIML components or the data science components. So this case, just to give you a quick perspective of what's the difference at a very high level and what's already provisioned within Factory and what's not, and we'll hear more as we go through this life cycle. So from a high level, ADF and Synapse, the adoption pathway is fairly straightforward. For most workloads in ADF, you can have a corresponding workload, very, very simple and straightforward in Fabric Data Factory. Your choice of ingestion and integration with pipeline or Spark notebooks, since that's available within Fabric, that's a kind of a no-brainer. It's fairly simple and straightforward to consider from a migration standpoint, from an ETL standpoint. The computes that are being served under Fabric are pretty good, which means your data formats as well as vOrder, which you would have heard about vOrder optimization, that's lightning fast. I mean, in terms of performance, it's really, really good, especially if you're trying to drive this data at a high compute for your analytics capabilities and for unification of that data. Some things to keep in mind if you're a Synapse user or Synapse dedicated pool user, as well as you also have other tenants like a Cosmos database that you need or a Microsoft Dataverse. The Synapse link is something that is not provisioned at this point in time. So something to keep in mind as you consider a migration to Fabric. And again, as I said, this is happening very quickly, which means some of these things would get enabled fairly shortly. It's just the as is post the recent GA of Fabric. So you will expect more and more features to start rolling out in the next few weeks, few months, potentially in a very short period of time as well. So, so we talked about the storage, we talked about the integration and ingestion, we talked about Power BI from a visualization standpoint. The fourth component, and again, I'll talk less about the migration in this case because a lot of customers have either some capability on data science, a lot of them have not enabled a lot of data science or AIML based capabilities within the lifecycle, and others have. But I'll use the data science process as the basis for how this is enabled in Fabric and how you can potentially use this service within Fabric. So the typical data science lifecycle process goes from a business use case, what analytics need do I have? What are the data needs to support that analytical use case, which most common CRISP-based methodology, if you think about it. Then the part around, can I prepare the data for my analytics? How do I create the right data sets? Where do I define those variables in an ML-based setup? And what notebooks can I use to do that? And how do I ingest that data? The whole process of bringing that data in or preparing that data for my analytical needs. The third piece, which is probably the most critical part when we talk about data science, is the libraries that can be used for data science. How can it be enabled? How can I have access to those? Are they customizable? Can they be brought into my Fabric landscape? That's the third typical part. The fourth thing is around operationalizing those for ongoing monitoring, for optimization, any changes that need to happen during the life cycle of the models that have been built. And then how do I showcase, or what are the outputs like? Can they be integrated into a Power BI or a seamless integration into a visualization tool so that I can see those outputs, the predictions in a particular form and shape that are easily consumable? Keeping that process in mind, a few things to remember is most of your data, as we know, with OneLake becoming that single epicenter of data, you can read data from OneLake in Pandas data frame for the application, use notebooks to quickly start that exploration, bring data in, make sure that the data is available, um, and ingest it using Fabric data pipelines and the likes. The ingestion process is very consistent with what I talked about with Fabric Data Factory or other tools and utilities. The good thing is with notebooks, the same interface that you use, you can also integrate your machine learning based libraries that you have. The enablement at this point in time is at this time is Spark ML. So if you're using Spark ML already, then those are kind of ingestible. You can start continue to consider those libraries. It's integrated. Your Synapse ML, which is previously MML Spark, those open source libraries are also available within these Fabric umbrella. So and ML flow primarily for operationalization of the Fabric-based your experiments as well as your ML your machine learning operations lifecycle. You could use ML flow within the Fabric construct, which means this kind of becomes your single end-to-end shop for any machine learning based tools or capabilities that you want to enable within Fabric. So if you haven't already invested in an Azure ML or a Databricks ML or any of that, just go for it if you're considering Microsoft Fabric for something like this. On the other hand, if you have certain scenarios, right? For example, you're using ADF for ingestion and integration, and you already have Databricks machine learning that you're using for your ML, then the question is it worthwhile migrating those workloads into Fabric? And that's kind of an evolved thought process, especially in the data science world. Am I already using or have my machine learning operations up and running? Is it all flowing end to end at this point in time, or am I just having experiments or data exploration and machine learning based exploration capabilities? Am I only using those? So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you have Databricks that you're using as part of your machine learning based capabilities, you're already using the Databricks enabled libraries, something to keep in mind, whether or not it's suitable or not. But yeah, and if you're also a heavy user of Delta Lakehouse, Databricks Delta Lakehouse, that's already there, right? It's in a PaaS-based model. You have a fairly large instance of Databricks that you're using. Then the question is, what can I benefit from if I move into the Fabric ecosystem and start using the data science workbench within Fabric? But again, as I said, again, there are pros and cons to each one of them. I'm trying to highlight some of them, especially for individual workloads. Obviously, with Power BI, Direct Lake was a great example of why you should move. In this particular case, it's unification. It's the same notebook that you'd use to create your own ML-based use cases, create your own models, and so on and so forth. So all of those benefits will come as you consider migrating into the Fabric ecosystem. So I talked about the four broad capabilities, right? Which is visualization, data science, engineering, which is integration and ingestion, and the warehouse data lake construct. There are some others around Activator that you saw, which I will hold off at this point in time. I think we'll talk about it in a further webinar, and as those evolve a little bit more, as well as real-time analytics. I know Praveen talked about it in the high-level view of what Fabric offers, but we'll drill down into the benefits. If you already invested in potentially a scheduling tool, how does that change? An event-based tool, how does that change with Activator? We'll talk about that in a follow-up conversation. But I wanted to cover the core, right? Typically, when people talk about data platform, you're thinking about storage, you're talking about engineering and compute associated with it. You're talking about visualization and reporting and data science as the four broad capabilities that you may already have within your ecosystem. In case you have a legacy ecosystem, right, and we'll drill down further as well on this one in a future webinar, but you could potentially have an Oracle Exadata-based data warehouse setup. You could have a Netezza-based setup. You could have a Teradata-based setup. typically, they're either on-premise based instances or their own cloud-based platforms that have been enabled. A variety of tools, for example, you could have an Oracle and an Informatica as your ETL and your data warehouse mix. One of our customers actually has exactly that. And we've enabled them to move into a PaaS-based ecosystem last year, and we're considering how and what would make sense to move to Fabric so that they can quickly start enabling, leveraging some of the benefits that Fabric offers in terms of unification and shortcuts and so on and so forth. So typically, if it's legacy, then you have these distinct separate data estate capabilities, which is separate ingestion, integration, separate data warehouse-based setups. You may have a data lake, you may not. You may not follow Medallion-based architecture, a disconnected code management process. Most of these are typical characteristics of a legacy data estate, right, that we all are aware of. How does Fabric address those? At a very high level, it enables higher scalability, lower TCO, lower maintenance, and the tech stack integration. It's all about unification. So your auto scaling capability, your shared capacity unit, pay as you go, or smoothing. Again, we talked about pay as you go. We also have capacity that you can purchase upfront, a reserved capacity when you think about Fabric. It kind of addresses your scalability needs with the opportunity or option of auto scaling as most of the Azure services would provide. In terms of maintenance, since it's a SaaS platform, you're not kind of considering individual components. You kind of have this whole solution that you can leverage end to end, which is lower maintenance, obviously, low code as much as possible, and integrated development studio, which means the same integration and the development studio that you can use would be accessible across the board. You are hearing more and more about Copilot. You will hear more and more about Copilot for Power BI, for ingestion. That should add tremendous productivity for your data ingestion needs, which is typically the heart of effort and time and so on and so forth. And then governance also embedded through that life cycle. And when we talk about tech stack integration, as we said, most of this comes together into one common umbrella. So before I complete, I'll take a couple more minutes, but at a very high level, the adoption journey is it starts at an assessment at the business case level. You're trying to understand whether or not Fabric is the right solution for me. And as I said, I've given you some of those inputs to start thinking. Have I already invested in Azure? What are the benefits that I'm seeing by migrating? Or should I consider both a PaaS-based service and a SaaS-based service? My functions, my finance function could benefit from the Fabric ecosystem. It enables self-service. But how do I connect that data? Let me continue to use a centralized PaaS-based service where your Azure Data Lake feeds into it through shortcuts. That way I'm not duplicating any data. The data that's there in the Azure service continues. Or do I want to consider a full-fledged migration from any of my Azure instances? I don't want to consider a separate Azure Data Lake storage. I want to bring it into the one lake storage, migrate everything, run away from all of my PaaS services, and stick to a SaaS-based service. Those are some of those capabilities that you have to think about. Am I using Power BI in isolation? Am I using Power BI in conjunction with the data ecosystem? So how does my insights journey work? So those are things that you would consider. Should I run a POC? Can I start small? Can I pull in certain data sets, see how it functions? As the capability evolves, which we expect it to evolve very rapidly in terms of the SaaS-based platform and performance capabilities, as well as governance, security. You heard some of those, some of that's already in place. There's going to be more that you'll hear on the Fabric journey. But some of those guardrails that I want to keep in mind are effective data security, implementation of administrations for capacity, provisioning for network pricing, for again, networking, storage, compute, as each of this is independent and costed separately. What makes sense for me versus not, right? Some of those factors that you would want to consider as you consider that adoption journey. But as I said, the core is, have I invested? What's the benefit that it'll get me? Can I get a start using Fabric for a particular function and so on and so forth? So things to keep in mind. And then what's the scalable path for me? How do I move from a small instance or a pilot that I delivered on Fabric into a larger adoption journey for the whole organization? So those are things to keep in mind. I'll just spend one more minute and then obviously I think I'll let Bianca go for questions. But in terms of an early adoption story, we were working with a fairly large construction company that we started talking to them about enabling Azure PaaS-based service while Fabric was still in preview. The core thing that they did was start considering an architecture that's a medallion-based architecture, which means they wanted their raw zone, their stage zone, and the curated zone, the bronze, gold, and silver. So that architecture remains consistent. While we were discussing whether or not to bring this into a PaaS-based service, in a sense, into Azure Data Lake Storage, we kind of held back a little bit. We were exploring Fabric in the preview mode as well, and tried to start bringing in data from Oracle, specific data from both Oracle as well as SharePoint in certain forms into the bronze layer. We use an accelerator that Pinwire has. It's called um, Pinwire's automated ingestion and data quality solution. It's AIDQ. That's a metadata-based ingestion tool that brings in data through using metadata. You don't really have to ingest data and build multiple pipelines. Again, we could use that within the construct here as well. But for this particular customer, we're using AIDQ extensively to reduce the effort for ingestion and integration of data. But we're building the data quality rules specific to the customer. We're bringing in data from Oracle. We have Fabric set up at this point in time. We are ingesting this data as we go through this life cycle. As we do our future webinar, I'll have more details, but in terms of performance and the scale. They are not a Power BI capacity user, which means they're using a lower instance of Fabric as we speak. And I mean, we'll see that evolve as well, which means they're Power BI Pro customers who are not on premium or who don't have a specific capacity at this point in time. So it's kind of a more straightforward adoption of Fabric, an Oracle shop in the past with SharePoint data assets, ingesting that data through Fabric. And again, as some of this work's happening, we're very excited to use the automated ingestion tool that is our accelerator and differentiator of the mix. But that project's in the works. We should have some more details before the end of this month as we implement it. We have some of the workloads migrated or moved into Fabric. So I'll have more details as we go through that life cycle. Hopefully I'm on time. And Bianca, I'll let you
Absolutely.
take it from here.
Yep. No, we're
Okay.
right on time. Thank you, Praveen and Chandra. We'll now begin our live Q&A. Thank you for submitting your questions. Our first question is, what is the capability or compatibility between Fabric and Power BI embedded? Is there a specific capacity limit on using PBI embedded with Fabric?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So Power BI embedded, it is like a embed content in an Azure capacity. So in terms of Fabric, only the Power BI experience in Fabric would be supported if you're utilizing the Power BI embedded SKUs. For the complete Fabric experience, there are three basic options. One is your Power BI premium capacity model, the P SKUs, that would give all your Fabric experiences. Or you can use a FSKU, which is a Fabric capacity model itself, or you can utilize a trial model. These three paths enable you to have the complete Fabric experiences.
Great, thank you. The next question is Synapse being deprecated?
Okay, so Microsoft has no plans to retire Azure Synapse Analytics, the past version of it. Customers, they can continue to deploy, operate, and expand the PaaS offering of the Synapse Analytics. Rest assured, if any of these plans change, we'll provide you with advance notice and we'll adhere to the support commitments as per our model lifecycle policy to make sure our customers' needs are met. But as of now, there are no plans. The past version and the Microsoft Fabric would exist together.
Wonderful, thank you. Any insights on MS Fabric and Microsoft Databricks with similar tech stack and capabilities across tech stack?
Absolutely. So, see, Microsoft Fabric and Azure Databricks, they have a better together story. Many of the data lakes which are built today using Azure Databricks, they are a general purpose data and analytics processing engine. So the data itself, it is actually stored in ADLS Gen 2, but transformed and cleaned, let's say, using Azure Databricks. We spoke about OneLake. Since the OneLake uses the same APIs as JDLS Gen 2 and it supports the same Delta Parquet format for data storage, your Azure Databricks notebooks can be seamlessly updated to use the OneLake endpoints for the data, whatever data you have been using. This will keep your paths consistent across the Fabric experiences, whether a data consumer is querying data through a warehouse in Fabric or a notebook and Azure Databricks. Both are seamlessly good.
Thank you. Any data governance out of the box capabilities in pipeline and future Fabric rollout?
This is a great question. So Microsoft Purview, it works with Microsoft Fabric so that users can discover and manage all your Fabric items in Microsoft Purview applications. If you know about Microsoft Purview Hub, it'll allow you to see the insights about all your Fabric data inside Fabric itself. So it is well integrated inside Fabric, and there'll be new capabilities which will be coming up as a Fabric roadmap as well. So currently, it acts as a gateway between your Fabric and Microsoft Purview so that you'll be able to govern all your data estate completely inside Fabric.
Right. What's Microsoft Data Warehouse MPP solutions like Synapse Future Strategy? Example, GCP, BigQuery kind of solution tooling.
I think we just answered that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
That just came in, so I
No,
wanted
no,
to
I
I
know.
wanted to
So the
capture that.
question
Yeah, okay.
is, yeah, the one lake construct with Delta Parquet and the high performance capability that I think we talked about should address that. Well, I know Praveen said there's no intent of deprecating or any of that, so your Synapse will continue to exist as of now. There's no change in that particular thing. But what we're trying to do is to make one lake powerful enough from a data processing standpoint, from a performance standpoint, and the Delta Lake format allows you to store data in a form where you can query it like you would typically do, both storage as well as performance related to compute, your query performance times, and so on and so forth. That architecture is being reimagined with Microsoft Fabric. So important to keep in mind that the BigQuery construct or the Synapse dedicated pool construct, that is, I mean, that's how we envisioned data warehousing. That's evolving as we talk about Fabric and one lake, and that the cold storage or the delta format in which that data would be stored. It's no longer a performance challenge anymore to query that data. It's typically what you would have seen in the data lake construct from the past in the past service. So it's an evolution from an architecture standpoint, from a performance standpoint, from a capability standpoint. So it's almost like a next generation solution that we're talking about with Fabric coming forward.
Thank you, Chandra. Can data be shared with external companies using OneLake?
Uh, as of now, you'll be able to share both your Fabric warehouse, that would be your data warehouse, and your lakehouse for your lakehouse concepts. Sharing, as of now, is a convenient way to provide all your users read access to your warehouse and lakehouse for downstream consumption. Uh, you will also be able to customize the level of permissions that the shared recipient is granted, just to make sure that he or she has the appropriate level of access. So yes, you will be able to share both your warehouse and lakehouse.
Right. If I have already invested in other database or data warehouse technologies, can I still utilize Fabric?
Okay. Uh, so some of the databases and data warehouses, they use proprietary storage formats, which makes us the ability to create your shortcuts is nearly impossible. So Microsoft Fabric has introduced a new concept called mirroring, which provides a modern way of accessing and ingesting data continuously and seamlessly from any database or data warehouse into the data warehousing experience of Microsoft Fabric. This is all in near real time, thus giving users immediate access to changes in the source. As of now, Azure Cosmos DB, Azure SQL DB, and Snowflake customers, they'll be able to use mirroring to mirror their data in one lake and unlock all the experiences and capabilities of Fabric Warehouse, your direct lake mode using Power BI, what Chandra was talking about earlier, your notebooks, and many more. Next phases, I think we'll be introducing SQL Server, Azure PostgreSQL, MySQL, MongoDB, and many other databases in the current year.
Great. We have one last question. Is there a migration path for existing investments in Pureview to be integrated with Fabric?
So Microsoft Purview is already integrated within Microsoft Fabric. So like I said earlier, the Microsoft Purview Hub, it'll allow you to see insights about all your Fabric data inside Fabric itself. So it is well integrated inside Fabric. So I don't think you'll need a migration path to it. However, we are investing significant development efforts in migration processes and tooling for our Synapse PaaS version. So the PaaS version of Synapse, if you are very interested in utilizing Fabric, those will be around strategy, your considerations, and how do you really migrate your data warehousing and Spark experiences, what you're used to in the Synapse PaaS version to Microsoft Fabric Warehouse and Lakehouse, as well as, let's say, the data and the pipelines. So there are many Microsoft articles which will detail that migration as such.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Praveen and Chandra, for answering those
Thank you so much.
questions. And thank you to the audience for submitting your questions. That wraps our webinar for today. And thank you for attending. Chandra and Praveen, if you have any last minute notes you'd like to share.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the things, and feel free to reach out to us and we'll address any other questions that come our way.
Wonderful. Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
one. Thank you. Bye-bye.